They took the apartment on Birchwood Lane. They took the Silverado. They took his son, and they did it with a mediator and a settlement agreement and a woman named Claudette, who charged $400 an hour to smile at both sides equally. 8 months later, a profile in Inc. magazine ran under the headline The Quiet Billion, and the man photographed in a stained Henley beside a folding table, in a rented storage unit in Tucson, was the same man Bridget had described to the court as financially unstable and emotionally unavailable. Cole Merritt did not read the article the day it ran. He was teaching his son how to solder. $340. Cole counted it on the kitchen counter of the apartment that was no longer his, twice, because counting it once had produced a number he did not want to believe. The agreement was already signed. The apartment on Birchwood with the back patio where he had planted tomatoes from seed every April, where his son Aiden had learned to ride a bike on the sidewalk strip out front, belonged to Bridget now. The Silverado belonged to Bridget. The court had granted her primary residential custody and left Cole with alternating weekends and one weeknight per week, supervised for the first 90 days by a parenting coordinator named whoever the county assigned. He did not argue the arrangement in the room where it was finalized. There was a version of him, 2 years earlier, that would have. That version had believed the process was designed to find the truth. He had since learned what it was actually designed to find, which was a resolution, and a resolution and the truth are not always the same building on the same street. What Bridget did not take was the storage unit on Industrial Frontage Road. She had never known it existed. Cole had rented it 3 years before the filing, back when the apartment felt too small for the equipment he was accumulating, and she had never asked where he kept the components. The oscilloscopes, the rack of servers, no bigger than a shoebox that he'd been quietly building into something. She called his work his hobby. She called the invoices clutter. She handed him a cardboard box of cables and a laptop bag. On the morning the movers came and said, "Take your equipment." So he did. The unit was 12 by 14 feet with a roll door and a single overhead light and a concrete floor that held the cold until noon in January. Cole moved a folding table in, a camp chair, an extension cord run from the outlet near the access panel. He slept on a friend's couch for 6 weeks until a room opened up in a house share 4 miles away. He paid the room month to month and kept the rest of what little he had for the storage unit, because the work was in the storage unit and the work was the only plan he had left. On the first weekend Aiden came, the boy walked through the roll door with his backpack still on and looked at the folding table and the servers and the tangle of wiring and said, without any judgment at all the way children state true things, "Dad, this is where you live now?" "Not live," Cole said. "Work." Aiden set his backpack down by the wall and climbed onto the camp stool Cole had brought for him and said, "Okay, what are we making?" Cole had taped a piece of paper to the side of the server rack that first week. Aiden had drawn it, a rectangle meant to be a storage unit. Roll door open, the two of them inside rendered in the confident lines of a 9-year-old who has never been told his drawing isn't good enough. He had written at the top in careful block letters, "Dad's Lab." Cole left it there. He was still looking at it 3 months later. The parenting coordinator assigned by the court was a woman named Sable Oren, and she arrived for the first supervised visit on a Tuesday morning with a clipboard and the specific manner of someone who has been trained to observe without appearing to observe. She had close-cut natural hair and reading glasses she wore pushed up on her forehead when she wasn't reading anything. She introduced herself in the way of someone accustomed to being unwelcome and said she'd be present for the duration of the visit, asked to see the space, and stood in the center of the storage unit, taking a long, slow inventory of what was around her. "Where does the child sit?" she asked. "The camp stool or the floor if he prefers. He usually prefers the floor." "Where does he eat?" "I bring food. We ate at the table last time." She wrote something. "And you're living off-site. 4 miles. She looked at the single overhead light. She looked at the extension cord. She did not say what she was thinking, but Cole had learned by then to read what people weren't saying, which was that this space did not look like what a stable parent looked like on paper, which was the only place most people were willing to look. She came back the following Tuesday 40 minutes early and found the roll door up, and Aiden cross-legged on a piece of foam camping mat Cole had brought in, explaining to his father, "Warty." Indicator light on the third server was red and not green. The unit was warmer. Someone had run a dedicated circuit off a proper junction, rather than an extension cord, and there was a second camp chair now, smaller, with Aiden's name written on the back in electrical tape because Cole had done it one night, and Aiden had seen it, and not said anything but had sat in that chair specifically every visit since. Sable set her bag down and began the walk she was paid to do. Outlets, exits, the fire extinguisher that had not been there on Tuesday and was there now. On the folding table she lifted a manila folder to look beneath it, the way she had been trained to look beneath things, and under it lay a laminated sheet, a business formation certificate from the state of Arizona, and beneath that, a stack of papers held together with a binder clip, the language technical and close, dated across a span of 4 years. Software patents, 8 of them. She read the top page twice. The inventor's name was listed on all 8. The assignee on 6 of them was a company called Holloway Systems, LLC, and even she, who had no background in technology, recognized the name from a piece she had read 2 months earlier about a startup no one had heard of until everyone suddenly had. She turned without speaking. Across the unit, Cole had crouched beside Aiden at the open rack and was showing the boy how to trace a circuit path with a finger, following the current the way you'd follow a line on a map, and Aiden was saying, and then where does it go, and then where the way children ask questions, which is without stopping. Cole did not look up at Sable. He did not point to the patent stack on the table. He did not say a word about what those papers meant, or what they would mean in 6 months, or what they had already meant to the people who had spent a decade trying to build what he had built in a storage unit in Tucson, on $340. And a camp chair. He showed his son how current moved through a system, the same way his own father had once shown him, crouched on a concrete floor a lot like this one, in a town 2 states away that no longer existed the way Cole remembered it. Sable had stopped writing some time before she noticed she'd stopped. Her phone buzzed. A message from the case supervisor flagged priority. The Whitmore custody modification has been moved up. Petitioner's counsel requested expedited review. Have your summary recommendation submitted no later than Friday of next week. She read it standing in a storage unit in Tucson while a man showed his son how electricity moves, and she thought, someone is trying to close this before something opens. The thing about a plan that works on paper is that it only works on paper. Cole understood this now. 18 months before the filing, he and a man named Devereaux Nash had incorporated Holloway Systems in Devereaux's kitchen with a handshake and 2 laptops, and a technology no one had funded because no one had understood it yet. Cole held the patents. He had drawn them. He had filed them himself, late at night after Aiden was asleep, in the 3rd year of a marriage that had already gone somewhere he couldn't name. When Aiden was born, someone had to be home. Bridget's consulting work had the salary and the benefits and the structure a family needed, and Cole's work was still theoretical, still unpaid in any way a bank statement could reflect. So he stepped back from Holloway in a formal capacity. His founder stake stayed locked in a vesting agreement, illiquid, worth nothing anyone could deposit. On paper he became what he would later hear called in a court document, self-described entrepreneur, no verifiable income. Bridget had a calendar in her mind that Cole had never been shown. She filed in March 14 months before the vesting cliff, when his stake would convert and the valuation would become real. She refinanced the apartment in her name, alone in April. She moved the joint account to a solo account in June. She had the temporary custody arrangement in place before the summer was out. He had thought it was the end of things falling apart. It was the only timing there had ever been. The town closed around the version of him the filing described. A bank he had used for 11 years turned down a small business line of credit in a meeting that lasted 9 minutes. A parts supplier he had bought from for years stopped responding to his emails without explanation. People from Aiden's school looked at him the way you look at a man about whom something has been said even when no one will tell you what was said or by whom. He took the money he had and spent it on components and server time and a second-hand oscilloscope. And he kept the most important work on an encrypted drive he wore around his neck under his shirt, because a man living in a room in a house share who built things in a storage unit looked exactly like the kind of risk the file said he was, and Cole had learned by then that looking like a risk was as good as being one, in rooms where the difference wasn't examined. Bridget cut the weekend visits short by text. She moved the Tuesday dinner window to 45 minutes. She wrote that Aiden had homework, that Aiden had a cold, that Aiden had a thing. Cole read each message standing at the folding table, and he did not write back what lived in him when he read them. He wrote Aiden a letter instead, on paper, by hand, about a circuit and a boy who had understood it faster than Cole had expected. He did not put a single word about Bridget in it. There were words. He had them ready. He kept them somewhere the letter couldn't go. Sable came for what she called a check-in visit, and she stood at the roll door with the clipboard down at her side the way it had been down the last time, which was its own kind of change. "What are you going to raise him on?" she asked. It was not the question on the form. Cole set down the driver he'd been using. He didn't reach for the patent folder. He pulled a laptop from under the table and opened it to a screen she wouldn't understand and said, "On this, and on what I know how to do with it." She looked at the screen longer than the visit required. She left without writing a single thing in her clipboard, and the not writing was the most significant note she had taken. Deborah came on a Wednesday night. Headlights crossing the roll door, a man in a good jacket who looked entirely wrong against the fluorescent light and the concrete. He had not been inside this unit before. He stood at the door for a moment the way people stand when they have something to say that they would prefer not to. "It's closing," he said. "Or it will. Ashworth Partners wants the platform, the whole architecture, licensing and supply both. They want to announce with the inventor's name attached. And Inc. is running a feature." He stopped. He started again. "The profile calls you the ghost engineer, the person no one knew was in the room until the room became worth $1 billion. That's you, Cole, in a storage unit in Tucson, and that's you." Cole stood very still beside the table. "When? 11 days to close. The piece runs the morning the deal goes public." Devereaux looked at him with something past the usual business of it. "And here is what I drove 40 minutes to say in person. Until that morning, I cannot confirm a single piece of this. The NDA covers your stake, the valuation, the deal structure, all of it. If I verify anything before the announcement, the buyer has the right to walk, and everything we've built goes with them." He spread his hands, empty. "I came because you deserve to hear it from me. I came because there is nothing else I am legally able to do. Not yet. Maybe not in time." Cole understood what he was being told, and he understood the thing underneath it. There was a custody modification hearing coming. One sentence, sit room, about what he was actually worth would restructure the entire case. He could have Aiden back to full residential custody in a single afternoon. All it would cost was the agreement Devereaux had spent 4 years building, and the company, and the friend in front of him, and the quiet work of a decade, turned into a weapon Cole swung to win a hearing. He was not going to do that. "We don't say it," Cole said. Devereaux looked at him for a long moment. "You could lose him waiting. You understand that? You could do the right thing and lose your kid because you did it." "I could lose him a dozen ways," Cole said. "That's not a way I'd be able to carry." Sable had left her reading glasses in the unit. She came back for them at nearly 11 at night, parked at the edge of the lot, and saw a man in a good jacket leave the storage unit with a handshake at the door that lasted a beat too long, a casual. The kind of grip that holds something old in it. She saw that there was a story larger than the unit it was occurring inside, and her instinct, the one 15 years on the job had built into something she trusted, said, "You are not reading the full file." She read the file again the next morning. The original evaluation that had established the custody arrangement. She read it the way you reread a thing that has begun to sound, overnight, like something assembled rather than observed. It had been filed in 8 days. Her own evaluations took 5 to 7 weeks. The required home visits were marked complete with no photographs attached, when the protocol required photographs. The collateral contacts, Aiden's teacher, the pediatrician, Cole's brother in Phoenix, were each listed as not available on initial attempt and never followed up. The whole document had the look of something done quickly by design, not by circumstance. She drove to Birchwood Lane and sat with Bridget at a kitchen table that had once been Cole's, and asked the required questions in the required order. Bridget answered them with the ease of someone who had rehearsed ease itself until it became indistinguishable from the real thing, until Sable asked about the original evaluation timeline and why the follow-up contacts hadn't been attempted a second time. Something went thin. "I really wouldn't know how the county handles its internal process," Bridget said. She straightened her coffee cup on the saucer with great precision. I do know that Gary Fenwick is someone a lot of people in this city consider a close friend. People with long memories for how a process goes and who made it difficult. She smiled without showing teeth. I'd think carefully before spending too much energy on a case that's already been decided. It was said pleasantly, the way a door closes pleasantly, no slam, just a latch finding its place. Sable wrote nothing in her notebook. She didn't need to write down a thing she intended to keep. Aiden was in the next room, and he appeared in the doorway the way children appear, all at once, with no particular announcement. He looked at Sable with serious eyes. Are you the one who says where I sleep? I help the judge understand what he needs to know, Sable said. Aiden thought about this with the gravity children bring to systems they are at the mercy of. My dad fixed our neighbor's dog once. The vet said it probably wouldn't walk right again. My dad built it a little brace out of a piece of PVC pipe and some foam, and it runs now. Like actually runs. He dropped his voice slightly, and he never says anything bad about my mom. Even when I ask him to say she was wrong. He just says both of us love you, and that's the part that's true. Sable said something appropriate, and carried that sentence to her car, and sat with it in the parking strip, for a while, before she was ready to drive. That evening, pulling the original file to copy into her own working documents, the system surfaced the access log the way it always did, and the way no one bothered to read. She read it. The file had been accessed 14 times in the past 6 weeks, edited 3 times. The edits came from a user account she didn't recognize, not anyone in her office, not the original evaluator, not her supervisor. The edits had replaced 2 sections of narrative language, softening a phrase here, removing a sentence there, in ways so small they would be invisible unless you had read the original, and were reading again looking for exactly that. Someone was in the file. Someone had been in the file the whole time she was working the case in the open, on faith, like a person who believed the floor was solid. The woman who came to the storage unit on a Thursday afternoon was somewhere past 60, with Bridget's posture and none of Bridget's ease, and she was standing in the gravel lot when Sable arrived, as if she had been there some time and was prepared to have been there longer. She held a large envelope against her chest with both hands in the way of someone carrying something that has already cost them to decide to carry. My name is Loretta Crane, she said. Bridget's mother. You're going to want to read what's in here, or you won't, but either way you're going to need to. Inside were 3 years of financial projections, a sheaf of printed messages, and a single page in a man's handwriting, blunt and certain. The projections listed Coles Holloway stake by name and by a projected valuation that Sable looked at twice and then set very carefully on the table. The messages ran between Bridget and Loretta herself, back to the winter before the filing. We file before the cliff, one read. After it lifts, he's a millionaire and everything is marital, and I get half of something. Before it lifts, he's a man in a storage unit, and I get everything. You know how timing works, Mom. You always said so. The last page was the worst one. The original custody evaluator, a man named Gary Fenwick, held a professional liability note through a private lender whose general counsel was a man named Royce Dilling, who also happened to be Bridget's former employer, a man Cole had met at dinner parties for 4 years and found agreeable enough. The note in Royce's handwriting on his letterhead said in plain terms what he expected Gary Fenwick to do and when he expected it done. Fast and thin it read. No detail. We handle the rest. Loretta watched Sable read it. She did not look at the door of the storage unit. She did not look anywhere in particular. She is my daughter, she said, and her voice had the quality of something that had been decided before she arrived and would not bend, now. And I have watched her hand a good man's child to a man who buys conclusions and calls it strategy. I've sat across from her at Sunday dinner for 3 years knowing what I know and telling myself it wasn't mine to say. It is mine. It has been mine the whole time. I'm done sitting on it. She pressed the envelope into Sable's hands and folded Sable's fingers around it with her own. Whatever it costs you to use this, use it. It has cost me enough already that I need to know it went somewhere. Sable had spent 15 years in the careful channel between parties, exact, neutral, a technician of the documented truth. She was not neutral now, and she knew it, and the knowing came with the particular clarity of a thing seen whole at last, after being seen only in pieces. She drove to the storage unit to tell Cole, and it was not an official visit, and the moment she stepped through the roll door they both understood that. He poured 2 cups of coffee from a small drip maker sitting on the floor near the outlet, and they sat in the camp chairs at the table, and the coffee went cold untouched between them, and neither of them filled the silence because the silence was already full. Royce Dilling did not raise his voice. He filed a formal motion requesting Sable's removal from the matter, citing her unscheduled contact with the respondent, her meeting with the petitioner's family member, and what the motion called, in language chosen by someone whose billing rate required good language, her evident personal alignment with the respondent's interests. The motion came from a firm that billed Dilling's development company regularly. Attached to the back of it, as an afterthought that was not an afterthought, a reminder that Sable's office operated on a county service contract due for renewal in the spring. It was a message with the manners of a filing. Step away, or the spring will be difficult. Cole heard about it through Loretta, who heard about it through the particular gravity of small cities, where information runs along lines of long acquaintances, like water along an existing grade. He stood in the storage unit with his phone in his hand and understood, with the cold weight of something finally made plain, that Sable was being spent, because she had stood too close to a fire that had been burning under the floor the whole time. He drove to her office and waited in the parking lot the way Loretta had waited in his, because some forms of respect require the same currency they were offered in. When she came out, he said, "Step back, recuse yourself. Give them what they need to hear and let it go. I'll find another way through this. I have always found another way. I am not going to be the cost that closes a career you spent 15 years building." Sable looked at him in the gray afternoon light for a moment that ran past professional into something else. "You have spent this entire case," she said, "putting a roof over someone else's head when yours was the one open to the weather. The deal, your son's name kept out of your mouth even when saying it would have changed everything, and now mine." She shook her head, slow and definite. "No. I read cases honestly for a living. This one I am going to read honest, and I am going to put my name at the bottom, and I am going to let the spring do what the spring is going to do." She filed her revised summary recommendation the following morning. It rested on what she had personally observed, what the access logs proved, and what Loretta's envelope contained, and it called for full restoration of the father's co-residential rights pending the modification hearing. She signed it, knowing what it might cost, and her hand was steady when she did. That weekend, Cole fixed her car. She had mentioned once, weeks earlier in passing, a power window on the driver's side that had stopped working, and that she'd been meaning to have looked at. He had not forgotten. He found the vehicle in the office lot Friday evening, ran the diagnostic, replaced the regulator, and was gone before anyone arrived Saturday morning. He left nothing but a folded piece of paper under her windshield wiper that said only, "Left side goes down now." She stood beside the car with her hand on the roof and worked through something private before she went inside. The hearing and the deal were going to fall in the same week. Cole could feel both of them ticking toward the same morning, and he didn't know which would land first, or what would be left of him in either room when it did. Royce made his final move the way men make final moves when pressure is the only tool they've ever trusted. He pushed the modification hearing forward a second time, calling in the kind of favors that cost real money and longer memories, until it sat on a Tuesday morning 10 days early. The intent was uncomplicated: end the matter before a single word about Cole Merritt reached the public record. Settle it while the file still said what the file said, while the man was still only a man with a camp chair and a folding table and $340. What Royce had not done, because he had never thought to ask the question that would have answered it, was find out what Cole had been building under that tarp in the back of a storage unit for 4 years. He had also not checked the publication date. The night before the hearing, Cole was not thinking about Royce or the calendar or the file. He was thinking about the encrypted drive on the table, finally open, and about Aiden beside him on the camping mat, in his winter coat, because the storage unit held the cold at night, regardless of the space heater. "You want to initialize it?" Cole asked. Aiden looked at him with the expression of a child who has been handed something real and knows it. Cole showed him the sequence, 3 keystrokes in a specific order, and Aiden pressed them with great seriousness. The system came online. A status bar ran its length and settled. Every indicator showed green, a clean, unbroken row of it, and the data rate in the top corner climbed to where it had never climbed outside of Cole's calculations, and held. It did not make noise. It did not show off. It simply performed completely and at once, which was the only thing Cole had ever built anything to do. "You did it, Dad," Aiden breathed. "We did," Cole said, and he kept the moment the way you keep a thing that has been a long time coming, carefully, with both hands in a place the wind couldn't reach. Across the city, a press run confirmed, a cover locked, an editor sent a final approval and received one back, and the man photographed in a stained Henley, beside a folding table in a storage unit in Tucson. The man the article called the quiet engineer, behind the architecture, no one understood until everyone needed it, was about to have a name on every screen in the country by morning. There was no clock anywhere that Royce Dilling's money could reach that would change what was going to happen at the top of the hour. The courtroom was low-ceilinged and overlit, and the story Bridget's attorney told inside it was polished from the telling. No verifiable income. Emotionally detached. A man who lived in a storage unit. Photographs of the camp chair, the camping mat, the folding table, shot at an angle designed to make the work on it look like clutter rather than what it was. They read the original evaluation in a tone that asked the room to receive it as fact. They were still reading when the phone started. Not loud, not all at once, but one after another, a soft, scattered chiming in pockets and bags around the gallery that should not have been happening and could not be stopped. The deal had gone public at the top of the hour. Holloway Systems, the storage unit startup from Tucson, acquired by Ashworth Partners in a 9-figure deal built on a platform architecture held entirely under a single inventor's name. The ink profile ran with it. The ghost engineer, photographed in a stained Henley in a 12x14 storage unit with a camp chair and a folding table and a server rack and a piece of paper taped to the side that a 9-year-old had drawn and labeled Dad's Lab. The door at the back of the room opened. Loretta walked the full length of the aisle with her own envelope and did not look at her daughter once the whole way. She entered the messages and the financial projections and the note in Royce's handwriting, and she said, under oath, in a voice that left no room in the room for any other sound, what Bridget had known, and precisely when she had known it, and what Royce had purchased and from whom. Devereaux followed, the NDA lifted at 9 that morning, and said under oath what Cole Merritt was and had always quietly been. Bridget was not looking at any of it. She was looking at the photograph. In the magazine someone had placed on the table between the parties, keep this. At the server rack behind her former husband's shoulder, at the piece of paper taped to the side of it, the crayon drawing with the 2 stick figures, and the roll door, and the words at the top in careful block letters. She understood, whole and at once and far too late to change anything, that the thing she had called his hobby for 11 years was the only thing in the apartment on Birchwood Lane that had ever been worth the square footage it occupied. She saw it plainly. The seeing arrived too late to matter. Cole stood when the judge asked if he wished to address the court. I never wanted the apartment, he said. I never wanted the truck. They could have kept everything, every piece of furniture and every key. I wanted my son. That is the only reason I am in this building. That is the only thing that has been true the entire time. Nothing in that magazine changes a word of it. The court restored full co-residential custody effective that day and referred the original evaluation to the County Oversight Board, and everyone in the room understood that the referral would end Gary Fenwick's career before the month was out, and put Royce Dilling's name on a document he would be explaining for years. With the case closed, there was no longer any formal reason for the distance that had existed between Cole and the woman who had been assigned to evaluate him. He found Sable already looking at him across the courtroom, and neither of them spoke, and the look was not long, and it did not need to be long to hold what it held. Royce Dilling lost 3 development contracts before the quarter ended. The county did not penalize him by name. His partners simply read the court record, saw what he had bought, and from whom and for what purpose, and one by one they became men whose calls he could no longer reach. He did not lose his wealth. He lost the thing adjacent to it that he had always confused for the same thing. Bridget kept the apartment on Birchwood. She moved through it understanding, at last and permanently, what she had spent 14 months engineering to keep and what she had spent at the same time failing to see she already had. That is a particular kind of weight. It does not go away because the rooms around it are familiar. Cole kept the storage unit. He didn't need it now, practically speaking. He could have bought the building, or the block, or the section of industrial frontage road the block sat on. He kept it because a man who learned to work on a concrete floor in the cold does not stop being that man because a magazine has put his name on a cover. He paid the rental forward for a year and left a check with the property management office, with a note that the unit was to stay available to him on a month-to-month basis indefinitely, because some spaces earn the right to remain. He hired the woman who ran the access desk at the facility, a retired machinist named Gus, who had let Cole run his extension cord off the common outlet for 3 weeks before Cole had known about the junction, and told him the job had benefits now and the rate was real. Aiden taped a new drawing to the server rack above the old one, whose corners had curled and whose colors had faded to something softer than the original. 3 figures this time, his father at the table, himself in the middle where he had decided he belonged, and a woman to the right, smaller than the other 2, holding a clipboard that she was not writing on, drawn with the particular care children reserve for the people they have decided are permanent. On the table below it, the encrypted drive sat open in its cradle, the status indicators still green, and beside it, in a frame Cole had put there the week the deal closed, was the first patent filing. The original, dated from the 3rd year of a marriage that had already become something neither of them named back when a man working late on a concrete floor had believed he was building something for his family, and had been right in the way that mattered, and wrong about which part of the family he was building it for. Sable came on a Saturday, with no clipboard and no county badge clipped to her jacket. She came because Cole had asked if she wanted to see the unit with the roll door open in the daylight for once, rather than the fluorescent overhead in the working dark. She parked beside a storage facility in Tucson on a weekend morning and stood in the entrance of a 12 by 14 space and looked at what had been built inside it across 4 years of being called a hobby by the people who should have looked more carefully. Cole handed her a cup of coffee, hot this time. She wrapped both hands around it and looked at the drawings on the rack and the frame on the table and the indicator still green on the drive in its cradle. Aiden's inside, Cole said. He wants to show you how the system initializes. Says you missed it the first time. I did, Sable said. Neither of them said the larger thing. There wasn't a need to say it. They stood in the open door of the unit with the desert morning behind them and the cool interior ahead. And the quiet between them was the kind that doesn't require filling, the kind built of enough shared hours that silence has become its own vocabulary. And that was all of it. They had taken the apartment and the truck and his son for a while, with paperwork and strategy and a man who could be purchased, but the thing that had always mattered most had never appeared in any filing, which is the precise reason no one had ever been able to reach it. It had lived in a drive worn around his neck, and in a server rack in a storage unit, and in a boy who had pressed 3 keys in a specific order and watched every light go green and said you did it to the one person who had never stopped. He had only ever been waiting for someone to look past what the file said and read what was actually there. Here is the question, and it is one that will split this room right down the middle. If someone spent over a year taking everything you had and then watched you rebuild all of it from $340 and a folding table, would you ever open that door again, or would you let them live in the thing they took and call it even? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. If this story stayed with you, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one. This story is a work of fiction. The names, characters, locations, and events are entirely imagined. No real person is depicted or referenced. The circumstances inside it, asset restructuring before divorce, the strategic timing of custody filings relative to financial agreements, and custody outcomes shaped by documentation rather than parenting, occur in family courts across the country every year, to people who did not see them coming. If you or someone you know is navigating a divorce or a custody dispute, speak with a family law attorney about your rights to marital property, founder equity, and your children. Free legal information is available through resources including lawhelp.org and your state's legal aid organization. Knowing what is yours is the first step to keeping it.